Imagine a town where there are no small joints, just small stoners, where Kush is a girl's best friend, and law-breaking is the new liberty. It's the Hollywood Hemptress Hour, hosted by your honey blunt Hemptress, Tere Joyce. Yeah!
Hello! So, in the paper, in the Oregon opinion section, and let's remember that this is an opinion, it's not fact. There's a woman named Susie Tracy who writes her opinion about Measure M. Measure 80. Measure 80 demands investigation and attention is what the headlines are. Measure 80 is the Cannabis Tax Initiative, which is on the ballot this year in the state of Oregon. Oregon is actually going to, on the ballot, possibly legalize marijuana recreationally in the state of Oregon. And by the way, Oregon was the first state to decriminalize marijuana in 1973, so maybe they'll be the first state to actually make it legal so that you can use it recreationally. Now, the woman, you know, I'm just going to read a little bit of what she says here. Well, I'm going to read probably like a little bit more than just a little bit. But she says, the discourse of this particular measure is filled with some fact, some fiction, some emotion at times, and a lot of prejudiced self-interest. I don't often beg, but I'm begging you to read the measure and use the brain that has been giving you, hopefully, the one that is free from the influence of cannabis, to reach a reasonable conclusion to how you should vote come this next November. I don't know about you, but that little paragraph just kind of like leaves a bad taste in my mouth. You know, I mean, it's like, how many times can we be insulted about how we can't make good judgment if we happen to use cannabis for whatever reason that we choose to, whether it be recreationally or for our anything that happens to ail us. Then she goes on to say, the measure is long, not as long as the health care bill. However, rambling at times, it seems to conflict with its own precepts. The petitioner of the measure is Paul Stanford, who owns a chain of medical marijuana clinics, and he expresses some interesting perspective on arguing for the legalization of this mind-altering substance. Within the body of the measure, he cites information claiming that George Washington grew marijuana for over 30 years, that Thomas Jefferson was an ardent supporter, that another governor from the 1700s found marijuana preferable over to tobacco, and then quotes one carefully selected but obviously misunderstood verse from the Bible as God's support of his position. Mr. Stanford serves up a recipe for change that has an interesting but unconvincing mixture of selective history, agriculture, science, propaganda, discrimination, education, legislative controls, religious interpretation, and self-serving control systems. I don't know about you, but actually it's the self-serving control systems that actually made cannabis illegal in the first place. Because if you go back to who was actually behind it, it's the people who are behind the monopolies that run our oil, our paper, and other things going on in this country, like the Rockefellers, the DuPont, and the J.P. Morgans, who also, by the way, happens to own Chase Manhattan. Now, let's break this down. I actually looked it up. I looked at the measure, and by the way, when I looked it up, I wasn't high, and I'm not high right now. So I feel that I'm in pretty rational mind, and probably a lot of you out there, you know, maybe you're high right now. Good for you. I'll be doing that later. I'll be smoking my own herb, but you know, if you're not, you know, I'm sure this is easy to understand. Here's the Oregon Tax Cannabis Initiative. It says, A, whereas the people of the state of Oregon find that cannabis hemp is an environmentally beneficial crop that yields several times more fiber for paper and textiles than any other plant. All right, that's a fact. That is a fact. You know, the woman who writes this article makes it sound like this is just kind of like hearsay, that we just kind of make this stuff up, that, you know, the people who smoke weed just happen to say, hey, you know what, you can grow hemp, you can have food, you can have clothing, you know what, we can even run our cars on it. But again, we're smoking the wacky tobacco. Now also she says, yields cloth and paper of superior strength and durability without the application of pesticides during cultivation, without producing cancer-causing pollutants during processing. That's a fact. Yields more seed oil and protein for progenitus and ecological biodiesel fuel, plastics, and nutritious food than any other plant. That's a fact. Yields more biomass than any other plant outside the tropics, though it grows well in the tropics too, and grows faster than any other plant on Earth in the temperate and cooler climates. That's a fact. Yields a substance that relieves the suffering of many ill people without life-threatening side effects. And whereas the people find that federal and corporate misinformation campaigns that economically benefit small groups of people have suppressed the information above, and the fact that George Washington grew cannabis for more than 30 years, and while he was a president, said that artificial preparation of hemp is really a curiosity, and told his Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, that he was suggesting the policy of encouraging the growth of hemp. Thomas Jefferson invented a device to process cannabis, and cannabis fiber was used for most clothing and paper production until the invention of the cotton gin. Governor Morris of Pennsylvania, who spoke at the U.S. Constitutional Convention in 1787 more than any other delegate, and of whom James Madison said, "The style and the finish of the Constitution properly belongs to the pen of Governor Morris," wrote a paper he sent to Thomas Jefferson called Notes Respecting Tobacco that compared cannabis and tobacco and concluded that cannabis is to be preferred. And whereas the people find that cannabis is Oregon's largest cash crop, indicating that cannabis prohibition has failed, whereas the people find that despite misinformation concocted to justify cannabis prohibition, the courts of Alaska, Hawaii, and Michigan have noted Presidential Commission findings, scientific studies, and learned treaties which, and it goes on. It goes on. It talks about how cannabis has never killed anybody. It talks about how we demonstrate that moderate cannabis use causes very little impairment of psychomotor functions, reveal no significant physical, biochemical, or mental abnormalities attributable solely to cannabis use, and that long-term heavy cannabis users do not deviate specifically from their social peers in terms of mental function. So here's basically like what is happening in terms of the history of cannabis and how it's happened in the United States and how it's been was originally a part of our country until it was like later on made illegal in 1937. So as this woman writes, she continues to talk about how it dwindles down, like Mr. Sanford serves up a recipe for change that has an interesting but unconvincing mixture of selective history, agriculture, science, propaganda. Okay, I read this part already. I challenge you to read the measure and then visit the following websites. And she gives drug abuse, Governor NIDA, National Institute on Drug Abuse. In the body of the Measure 80, Mr. Stanford states that the people in the state of Oregon find that cannabis hemp is an environmentally beneficial crop. And the people find that federal and corporate misinformation campaigns economically benefit small groups of people who have suppressed information. And in Section 1, this act is a scientific experiment by the people of Oregon. And then she says, really now, we're all scientists. When you read the bill, it doesn't say that Oregon is like, doing a scientific experiment on cannabis. It's asking that we actually have thorough investigations and experiments on how to use the plant properly to treat different ailments. And it does not say that, we're all just experimenting with cannabis. There's already been tons of studies out there, and they've been published, and they're accurate on what cannabis can do. It reduces tumors in your lungs, and it's just, so I just find this, I don't know, I find this really annoying. And then it goes on, she talks about how, and what about the children? Okay, what about the children? What about the children? I think that is the for me personally, and you could say that this is my opinion, but if you really care about the children, then let's tax it and regulate it and make it so it is legal for those adults who want to use it responsibly, and have our government regulate. That's how we keep it out of the hands of the children. You educate your children. You tell your children that this plant is something that needs to be honored and used correctly. And again, I do not advocate that children use it. I do not, unless your child has a disease that it would be beneficial for them to get well from. Then it would be like just any other medicine that you'd be administering to your child. So in the end, this woman says, and this is the part that I love the most. She says, please accept our invitation to attend our monthly DFY Drug-free Estacada Families and Youth Coalition meetings held each month on the third Tuesday from 1:30 to 3 p.m. at the Estacada Library and the Flora Room. Now, she says, as one of the 4,000 such organizations across the country, our organization is funded by a federal grant out of the White House for the purposes of reducing substance abuse among youth ages 11 to 18. Now, I wonder, the White House, could it possibly be funded by some of the money that Eric Holder might have made in the Fast and Furious trade where he sold arms to the Mexican drug lords?